Have you ever met someone who seemed kind, even charming, but left you feeling drained, confused, or even doubting your own sanity? It's not paranoia. It might be the single most dangerous sign in a person, hidden just beneath the surface. According to Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, the most threatening individuals are often not the obviously cruel, but those who are completely unaware, or worse, fully merged, with their own dark side. Jung called it the shadow. It's the collection of impulses, traits, and instincts we repress because they don't fit our ideal self-image. But here's the catch: what we refuse to face doesn't disappear. It festers. In this video, we're diving deep into Jung's theory of the shadow. What happens when someone refuses to confront it? What happens when that darkness becomes them? And more importantly, how can you spot it before it's too late? Stick around, because once you understand this hidden psychological blueprint, you'll start seeing the signs everywhere. And trust me, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Your perspective on people, and maybe even yourself, will change forever. Clapperboard Section 1: Understanding Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a dark, hidden side, what he called the shadow. But don't be fooled by the poetic name. This isn't something mystical or vague. It's disturbingly real. And whether you know it or not, it's operating within you right now. So what exactly is the shadow? It's everything you refuse to acknowledge about yourself. Your envy. Your rage. Your craving for control. The thoughts you label bad, unacceptable, or not me. It's your emotional trash bin, the stuff you shove down when you're trying to be a good person. But the shadow isn't evil by default. It's simply human. It's the raw, unfiltered side of you that doesn't wear a mask. And here's the twist: the more you suppress it, the more it shows up, just in ways you don't expect. Jung argued that denying the shadow gives it power. And left unchecked, it takes the wheel of your personality, without you even realizing it. Think of it like malware in your mental software. You don't see it. You don't hear it. But it slows everything down, creates glitches in your relationships, and sooner or later, causes a crash. Let me ask you something: have you ever met someone who's too nice? Like, suspiciously nice? They never express anger, never set boundaries, always smile through gritted teeth. That's not enlightenment. That's emotional constipation. And when the shadow breaks through, it's not pretty. Think of a shaken soda bottle, silent outside, explosive inside. This person might say, "I don't do conflict." Translation: I have so much unresolved resentment, I don't even trust myself to open my mouth. Jung called the shadow the thing a person has no wish to be. But here's the kicker: just because you wish it away doesn't mean it disappears. Suppressed traits build pressure. Think about it: when you're told as a child, "Don't be selfish," you bury that impulse. But then you grow up overgiving, over-apologizing, and secretly resenting everyone. Sound familiar? We learn to disown parts of ourselves to fit into society. Culture, religion, family, they all shape our idea of who we're supposed to be. So we create a mask. Jung called this the persona. It's our social costume. But everything we cut out to make that mask, that's the shadow. The danger comes when we believe we are only the mask. Because guess what happens to the shadow when you ignore it? It doesn't just sit quietly in the corner. It projects itself. You start seeing in others what you refuse to confront in yourself. You might call your boss arrogant, while you secretly crave recognition. You accuse your partner of being manipulative, when you've been emotionally evasive. Sound harsh? That's the shadow talking. And it doesn't care about your ego. This is how decent people end up hurting others. Not out of malice, but out of blindness. Now here's where things get dark. The people most controlled by their shadow often seem the most virtuous. They preach about love while harboring hate. They act morally superior while quietly belittling others. And when confronted, they'll double down with outrage, because their self-image must remain intact. Ever met someone who explodes when you give them gentle feedback? That's not just ego. That's their shadow feeling exposed. You see, the shadow doesn't like being seen. It hides in overcompensation, in fake humility, in virtue signaling, in exaggerated kindness that feels off. And that's not just annoying, it's dangerous. Because once someone fully identifies with their persona and disowns their shadow, they become unpredictable. Worse, they believe they're always right. And that makes them unstoppable, in the worst way. Let me give you a story. There was once a man admired for his generosity and calm demeanor. He volunteered at shelters, donated to charity, and always smiled. Everyone said, "He's such a good man." Until one day, he had a breakdown. Not a small one. He lashed out at his family, quit his job, and disappeared for months. When he resurfaced, he admitted he'd been living a lie, pushing down years of anger, jealousy, and shame to maintain the good guy image. That was his shadow, bursting through the cracks. And here's the punchline: he didn't know it was happening. He genuinely thought he had no dark side. That's what made it so dangerous. So what do we do? Jung wasn't pessimistic. He didn't say we're doomed to be haunted by the shadow. He said we must integrate it. Not by indulging it, but by understanding it. When you feel anger, acknowledge it. When you catch yourself judging others, ask, what part of me am I avoiding? This level of self-awareness isn't weakness. It's power. Because it gives you control over what you would otherwise deny. Imagine shining a flashlight in a dark room. The shadows don't disappear, but you stop tripping over the furniture. But here's the real question: what happens when someone not only denies their shadow, but becomes possessed by it? What happens when their suppressed darkness takes over, and they still think they're the hero? That's when things get truly dangerous. That's what we'll uncover next. Clapperboard Section 2: Why Denial of the Shadow is Dangerous. Let's not sugarcoat it. Denying the shadow is like taping over a leaking pipe with duct tape and pretending it's fixed. Eventually, it bursts. And when it does, it floods everything. Carl Jung warned that what we resist, persists, and nowhere is that more true than with the shadow. Denial doesn't destroy it, it weaponizes it. Against others. Against ourselves. Against our ability to live in reality. Think of denial as the breeding ground for psychological projection. The more you suppress, the more you unconsciously export your inner chaos onto others. You don't just feel insecure, you accuse others of trying to outshine you. You don't just feel guilt, you start finding reasons to tear others down. And just like that, you become a silent arsonist, burning bridges while convincing yourself you're putting out fires. Let's take a relatable example. Have you ever dealt with someone who constantly accuses others of being manipulative, dramatic, or toxic, yet somehow, they're always in the middle of chaos? That's not coincidence. That's projection on autopilot. Here's where things get terrifying: people in denial believe their version of reality is accurate. They genuinely think they're the victim, the truth teller, the morally superior one. Meanwhile, their relationships suffer, their worldview becomes warped, and their inner life becomes a battlefield they refuse to acknowledge. One of Jung's most haunting insights was this: people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That includes destroying friendships, sabotaging careers, even starting wars, all to escape a mirror. But how does this denial form in the first place? It usually starts small. A child learns that expressing anger leads to punishment, so they stop. A teenager realizes that vulnerability gets mocked, so they armor up. An adult is told to be strong, so they suppress grief. Each of these is a mini act of denial. Over time, it becomes second nature. Before you know it, the person has built an entire personality around who they think they should be, while the shadow collects dust in the basement, waiting. Eventually, that basement floods. And it's not just emotional, it's behavioral. People in deep denial of their shadow often sabotage relationships with passive-aggressive behavior, attract toxic partners to reenact unprocessed traumas, over-identify with ideologies to validate their righteous image, gaslight others not out of malice, but because they genuinely can't see themselves clearly. Let's pause for a pattern interrupt. If you've ever heard someone say, "I only attract crazy people," it's time to ask, what's the common denominator? You're the algorithm feeding the chaos. Shadow denial, party of one. Now, not everyone in denial becomes a threat to others, but many do. Especially when the shadow fuses with the persona. This creates a split. The person believes they're only good, only right, only just, and any challenge to that self-image is treated as an attack. It's like trying to wake someone up from a dream they don't know they're having. Jung didn't mince words here. He called this shadow possession. At this stage, the individual becomes a puppet. They're not making conscious decisions anymore, they're reacting, projecting, defending, attacking, all under the illusion of self-righteousness. And this can happen to anyone. That's the danger. Shadow denial isn't limited to a specific personality type, job title, or background. It hides in therapists who refuse to look inward. In spiritual leaders who confuse enlightenment with ego. In everyday people who destroy relationships and then wonder why no one sticks around. Let me tell you a story. A woman I once knew, let's call her Emma, was the picture of kindness. Always offering help. Always smiling. Always saying the right thing. But over time, the cracks showed. She'd guilt-trip friends for setting boundaries. She'd explode at tiny slights and then blame others for making her upset. When confronted, she'd cry and say, "I just try to do everything for everyone." What looked like compassion was actually control. What looked like sensitivity was unchecked resentment. She wasn't evil, but she was dangerous. Not because of malice, but because of her blindness. Emma had no idea who she really was. Her shadow had taken over, and wore the mask of kindness to stay hidden. This is why Jung emphasized integration. Because denial doesn't just distort your life. It infects others. Unchecked shadows become partners who emotionally manipulate and call it love. Bosses who humiliate employees and call it tough leadership. Parents who control their kids and call it protection. If you're wondering how people end up living double lives or committing unthinkable acts while looking innocent on the outside, this is how. Shadow denial fractures the self. And fractured selves don't break in isolation, they cut others in the process. So what's the way out? It starts with courage. The courage to ask, what am I avoiding about myself? The courage to look at your jealousy, your rage, your fear, without flinching. The courage to say, this is me, and I won't let it control me. Because the shadow loses its grip the moment you name it. You don't conquer your demons by pretending they don't exist. You conquer them by shaking their hand and saying, I see you. But not everyone is willing to do that. Some people don't just deny the shadow, they let it consume them completely. And those are the ones Jung was most afraid of. In the next section, we'll uncover the ultimate red flag, when someone becomes fully possessed by their shadow, and walks among us wearing the mask of normalcy. Because by the time you notice, it may already be too late. Clapperboard Section 3, the most dangerous sign, the fully possessed shadow. Here it is, the most dangerous sign in a person, according to Carl Jung. It's not arrogance. Not aggression. Not even cruelty. It's total identification with their persona, and complete possession by their shadow. These are the people who have no separation between their mask and their darkness. They believe they are the good guy, the hero, the enlightened one, and anyone who challenges that illusion becomes the enemy. Let that sink in. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who know they're flawed. It's the ones who genuinely believe they're above reproach. They don't wrestle with their shadow, because in their mind, there's nothing to confront. That absence of inner tension. That's the red flag. That's the ticking bomb. Jung wrote, "The greatest danger to mankind is not in the bomb but in the psyche of man." And this is what he meant. Let's paint the picture. These individuals appear confident, polished, even charming. They often hold positions of influence. They may lead companies, communities, or even entire nations. But behind the scenes, they are emotionally volatile, manipulative, and pathologically unable to admit fault. Why? Because their shadow has become fused with their identity, and to question themselves would mean psychological death. They will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their self-image. They will rewrite reality, twist facts, and destroy others' reputations just to maintain their narrative. They're not lying, they believe the lie. That's what makes it so chilling. Let's take an example from history. Adolf Hitler believed he was a savior. A messiah. He didn't wake up thinking, "I'm the villain." His shadow, rage, vengeance, a lust for power, consumed him entirely. But instead of facing it, he projected it outward, creating a narrative where others were the problem. The result? Genocide, destruction, war. It's tempting to think this level of possession is rare. It's not. You see it in smaller forms everywhere. The parent who micromanages their children and calls it love, but lashes out when questioned. The boss who humiliates employees under the guise of standards, but never reflects on their own behavior. The spiritual leader who demands blind obedience, while insisting they're doing it for your awakening. These aren't one-off behaviors. They are patterns. And here's the deadliest part: when the shadow takes over, the person becomes untouchable. Not in power, but in perception. They create psychological force fields that repel accountability. If you've ever dealt with someone like this, you know how it feels. You question your reality. You walk on eggshells. You feel like you are the problem. This is how fully possessed shadows operate. They invert the moral compass. They make their victims feel guilty, ashamed, broken. And that's no accident. It's psychological warfare, and they've trained their whole life for it, without knowing. Let's break this down further. Here are the 5 signs someone has become possessed by their shadow. They believe they are always the victim. No matter what happens, they find a way to be the wounded party. It's not a defense mechanism, it's their worldview. They rewrite events to avoid blame. Conversations, facts, even timestamps can be twisted to protect their self-image. They react aggressively to simple feedback. You suggest a minor correction, and they explode. Why? Because it threatens the false self they've built. They weaponize morality. They'll accuse others of lacking integrity, while hiding their own misconduct under a layer of righteous behavior. They isolate those who don't conform. If you don't validate their reality, you're the enemy. You'll be ghosted, slandered, or punished, emotionally or socially. Now, before we go full paranoia mode, here's a crucial detail: none of this happens consciously. They don't wake up thinking, "How can I manipulate people today?" They wake up thinking, "Why does no one understand me?" That's the tragedy. These people aren't monsters. They're fractured. But because they never learned how to confront their shadow, they become its puppet, and worse, they think they're dancing on their own. So how do you deal with someone like this? Short answer: very carefully. Long answer: you must first accept that you cannot fix them. You cannot logic your way into their mind. You cannot awaken someone committed to staying asleep. Instead, protect your boundaries. Speak your truth once, clearly, calmly. If they twist your words, step back. If they attack, disengage. Don't play chess with someone who's using Uno cards and making up the rules as they go. Also, look at the feeling they leave you with. If someone constantly makes you doubt your memories, question your worth, or feel emotionally unsafe, that's not connection. That's contamination. And here's the real kicker. The reason Jung warned us about these people isn't just because of what they can do to others. It's because we are all capable of becoming them. Let that land. If you think, I could never act like that, then pause. Because that's exactly what Jung meant. The moment you believe you're immune, that's when the shadow gains ground. Humans have an incredible capacity for self-deception. And that capacity is what makes unchecked shadows so dangerous. There's a reason the most horrifying villains in fiction often believe they're saving the world. That's not just narrative design, it's psychological truth. Now here's where it gets personal. If you've ever been gaslighted, manipulated, or emotionally harmed by someone whose mask didn't match their actions, you've seen this possession firsthand. But if you've ever lashed out at someone you love, blamed others for your pain, or defended yourself at all costs, then the shadow has touched you too. No one escapes this. The question is, do you confront it? Or do you let it run the show? Because the line between awareness and possession is razor thin. And if you're not careful, you'll cross it, while thinking you're just being honest or standing your ground. Let me close this section with a hard truth. The most dangerous sign in a person is not rage, or pride, or even cruelty, it's radical self-righteousness rooted in total self-ignorance. The person who believes they have nothing left to learn, is the one you should watch closest. Because they've stopped growing. And what doesn't grow, decays. Clapperboard Section 4, The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, Covert Manifestations. Not all shadows roar. Some whisper. If Section 3 exposed the blatantly dangerous personality, the overtly possessed individual, this section unpacks a far subtler threat, those whose shadows masquerade as virtue, kindness, or vulnerability. These are the wolves in sheep's clothing. And they are harder to spot, because they don't seem dangerous, until it's too late. Let's be clear, these individuals aren't always conscious manipulators. Often, they genuinely believe they're doing good. That's what makes it so disarming. They don't yell or dominate. They manipulate with guilt, distort through flattery, and control through pity. Sound familiar? Let's start with a common behavior, passive aggression. The covertly possessed shadow rarely attacks directly. Instead, it lingers behind vague comments, backhanded compliments, or deliberate silence. You might hear things like, "Oh, you didn't invite me. That's fine. I'm used to being left out. You're lucky. Not everyone has it easy like you. No worries, I'll just figure it out, somehow." What looks like humility is actually an emotional ambush. The goal? To make you feel like you're the villain, while they remain the wounded saint. Let's introduce a pattern interrupt. Why do people who claim to hate drama seem to attract the most of it? It's not the universe. It's them. They're the director, the screenwriter, and the lead actor in their own psychological soap opera. Now here's a deeper twist, many of these individuals use virtue as a weapon. They present themselves as exceptionally moral, hyper-compassionate, or tirelessly selfless. But when someone operates from unintegrated shadow, even goodness becomes a tool for domination. You'll hear lines like, "I just care too much. I'm always the one who gives and gives. I don't understand why people can't just be decent." On the surface, these sound noble. But pay attention. There's usually an undertone of resentment, superiority, or veiled judgment. Jung warned that the shadow doesn't just hide in aggression. It hides in righteousness. And the more pure someone tries to appear, the more likely they're suppressing something darker beneath. Here's the paradox. The louder someone insists they're good, the more you should pause and ask, why the performance? Another trait of the covert shadow is emotional manipulation disguised as vulnerability. They'll open up to you, strategically. They share personal stories not to connect, but to control your perception. They cry at the right moments. They tell tragic tales, then subtly use them to guilt-trip or silence you. You start feeling like any boundary you set is an act of cruelty. This isn't empathy. It's emotional leverage. Let me tell you a story. A young man named Alex had a girlfriend who was emotionally delicate. She'd often cry during minor disagreements, claim abandonment if he needed space, and apologize profusely while making herself the victim, no matter the situation. At first, he saw her as sensitive. But over time, he realized she was deflecting all accountability. Her tears weren't bridges, they were shields. And every time he tried to talk, he was made to feel like the monster. This is how the covert shadow operates. It disables your defense system while appearing harmless. And here's the tragedy, Alex began doubting himself. He lost confidence. He grew anxious, second-guessed his own memories. Not because she yelled at him, but because she subtly unraveled him under the guise of love. That's how a soft-spoken shadow destroys. Not with fire, but with fog. Now, this doesn't mean every sensitive person is dangerous. Or that kindness is fake. What matters is self-awareness. True vulnerability doesn't demand loyalty. It invites it. True morality doesn't weaponize guilt. It inspires trust. The difference is subtle, but critical. So how do you spot someone whose shadow has gone covert? Watch for these 4 signals. Inconsistencies between words and energy. They say they're fine, but their tone cuts. They say, I just want peace, but keep escalating. Emotional rewards for compliance, punishments for boundaries. You feel praised when you agree. You're guilt or iced out when you push back. Virtue signaling. They constantly talk about how caring, honest, or real they are, but their behavior contradicts it. Selective vulnerability. They share just enough pain to control the narrative, but never enough to evolve. So what's the damage? Covertly possessed shadows don't explode. They erode. They eat away at your trust in yourself. You begin over-explaining, apologizing for things you didn't do, losing sleep over someone else's moods. And worst of all, you can't quite explain why. Because the threat doesn't look like a threat. It looks like someone who just needs a little help. Someone who's been through a lot. Someone who means well. But make no mistake, if someone's shadow is operating unchecked, their wounds will become weapons. And you'll be the battlefield. So what can you do? First, stop expecting evil to look like evil. It often arrives wearing empathy, wrapped in politeness, and wielding pain like a sword. Second, tune into your body. If you feel constantly anxious, defensive, or confused around someone, your nervous system has already noticed what your conscious mind hasn't. Third, don't engage in emotional chess matches. Don't try to win. Don't try to fix. Just notice. And create space. Finally, and this is key, look inward. The reason covert shadows fool us is because we all have one too. And the parts of us that don't want to see it, are the parts most susceptible to being fooled. Because what we repress in ourselves, we tolerate in others. So ask yourself. Where am I using kindness to avoid conflict? Where am I using sadness to avoid responsibility? Where am I being good, to avoid being whole? The wolf in sheep's clothing is real. But it doesn't start with others. It starts with us. In the next section, we'll explore what happens when you allow these personalities into your life, and how your mind, your peace, and even your identity begins to fracture under their influence. Because the shadow doesn't just haunt the host, it infects their entire environment. Clapperboard Section 5, The Psychological Fallout. When you allow someone possessed by their shadow, especially the covert kind, into your life, the cost isn't always visible at first. It doesn't look like drama. It doesn't feel like war. It's slower. Subtler. More corrosive. It feels like walking into a room and forgetting why you came. Like second-guessing your emotions. Like apologizing for things you didn't do. This is the psychological fallout of shadow possession, and you'll almost never see it coming until it's already begun. Let's break down what really happens to you when you're exposed to someone who has fully merged with their shadow. First, your boundaries begin to erode. It starts small. You let one uncomfortable comment slide. You ignore one manipulative outburst. You excuse one contradiction. Why? Because they're going through something. Because they didn't mean it like that. Soon, your inner voice, the one that says something's off, gets quieter. Until you can't hear it at all. Then comes cognitive dissonance. You know they're mistreating you, but they also say they love you. You remember being insulted, but they insist you're too sensitive. You felt angry, but now you're apologizing. This psychological split creates internal chaos. You question your memory, your instincts, your reality. It's not just confusion, it's gaslighting. But not always intentional. Remember, someone possessed by their shadow believes their own version of reality. Which makes it almost impossible to confront them, because they're convinced they're right. Next, you'll notice emotional exhaustion. The fallout isn't loud. It's quiet, cumulative fatigue. You start canceling plans, doubting friendships, pulling away from hobbies you once loved. Why? Because your energy is being spent trying to decode someone else's emotional puzzle. You become a full-time interpreter of someone else's moods, pain, and projections. Now for the pattern interrupt. Ever been in a relationship, romantic or otherwise, where every day felt like solving a Rubik's Cube with missing colors? That's not intimacy. That's survival mode. Another side effect, identity erosion. Long enough exposure to someone's unintegrated shadow and you start to lose track of who you are. You become the peacekeeper. The fixer. The absorber of blame. Your emotional life becomes reactionary, not because you're weak, but because their reality becomes so dominant, you forget to protect your own. And here's the most dangerous part. You begin mirroring their behavior. You start repressing your anger to avoid conflict. You become passive-aggressive because directness doesn't feel safe. You start manipulating, not maliciously, but as a survival strategy. This is the shadow's contagion effect. You internalize their chaos, and replicate it. By the time you realize it, you've not only lost connection with your inner voice, you've adopted someone else's emotional blueprint. Jung warned us, the shadow not only corrupts the individual, it distorts the collective. And now, you're a carrier too. Let me tell you a story. A man named Daniel had a boss who was unpredictable. One moment, praising him in front of others. The next, humiliating him for minor mistakes. When Daniel tried to speak up, the boss accused him of being ungrateful, emotional, and unprofessional. Over time, Daniel stopped speaking up. He started staying late to avoid criticism. He even began criticizing others, unconsciously mimicking his boss's pattern. One day, a coworker told Daniel, "You've changed. You're not kind anymore." And that hit harder than any performance review. Daniel wasn't just surviving. He was becoming what he once resented. That's the fallout. And it can happen in families. In marriages. At jobs. In friendships. The shadow is a shapeshifter. If you don't protect your energy, it will remake you. So how do you heal? First, acknowledge what happened. Don't downplay it. Don't romanticize it. If someone infected your mind, your mood, your identity, name it. Second, reclaim your boundaries. Not just physical, but emotional. That means not explaining your decisions to someone who weaponizes guilt. Not defending your truth to someone who's already rewritten it. Third, reconnect with your inner compass. Journal. Talk to safe people. Reflect without shame. Ask yourself, what did I give up to keep the peace? And finally, do your own shadow work. Because here's the truth, the only reason someone else's shadow stayed in your life for so long, is because yours let them in. That's not self-blame. That's empowerment. In the next section, we'll explore how to protect yourself, not by living in fear, but by building awareness. Because the shadow's only real power is remaining unseen. Clapperboard Section 6, Awareness as Protection. The shadow thrives in the dark. But the moment you shine a light on it, its grip weakens. Carl Jung didn't teach shadow work to scare people. He taught it to empower them. Because when you become aware of the unconscious forces driving you and those around you, something incredible happens. You stop being manipulated. You start seeing clearly. Awareness is protection. And the first line of defense? Stop assuming good intentions are enough. In today's world, we're taught to give people the benefit of the doubt. And yes, compassion matters. But chronic compassion without boundaries isn't noble, it's self-abandonment. It turns you into a magnet for people who haven't faced their own darkness. Awareness means recognizing patterns, not just apologies. It means noticing how you feel around someone, not just what they say. Ask yourself, do I feel calm or anxious after spending time with this person? Do I trust my own thoughts more or less after we talk? Am I shrinking to stay in their good graces? These aren't small questions. These are early warning systems. Next, learn to decode emotional manipulation. Remember, the shadow often hides behind kindness, pity, or moral superiority. It may arrive in soft tones and poetic words. But underneath, it seeks control. Not connection. A manipulator's most common tactic. Making you question yourself. They don't need to scream. All they need to do is plant doubt. Are you sure that happened? Maybe you're just overreacting. I'm sorry you feel that way. If your instincts go off, trust them. Awareness isn't paranoia. It's clarity. Another key to protection. Know your own shadow. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That quote should be tattooed on the soul of every person who wants freedom. Here's a truth most people avoid: you attract what you tolerate. And you tolerate what you don't yet see in yourself. If you constantly attract people who cross your boundaries, ask, where am I ignoring my own? If you keep finding yourself in draining dynamics, ask, what part of me thinks I need to earn love through self-sacrifice? Your shadow isn't trying to hurt you, it's trying to wake you up. It's the emotional debris of past wounds, unfinished business, and buried truths. When you meet it with honesty instead of fear, it becomes your ally. Let's take a moment to break this tension with a humor reset. If you ever start feeling enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Shadow work speedrun, unlocked. Another form of protection is observation without reaction. People possessed by their shadow feed on drama. If you react emotionally, you become part of their narrative. But if you observe, calmly, without defensiveness, you reclaim your power. When someone tries to guilt-trip you, say nothing. When someone rewrites history, hold your version silently. When someone demands emotional labor you never signed up for, smile and exit the conversation. No one can hijack your peace without your permission. And awareness helps you revoke that permission. Finally, remember, you don't need a reason to protect your peace. This is big. You don't owe toxic people an explanation. You don't need to prove someone is unhealthy before walking away. You don't need a checklist of evidence. You just need the feeling that says, this isn't right for me. That's awareness. That's maturity. That's self-respect. Let me leave you with this. Awareness doesn't mean becoming hypervigilant or suspicious of everyone. It means trusting yourself more deeply than ever before. It means being brave enough to look at yourself and others without illusion. It means being honest about who deserves your energy, and who doesn't. In the next section, we'll talk about the most terrifying twist of all. What if you are becoming the person Jung warned us about? Because awareness doesn't just protect us from others. It protects us from becoming our own threat. Clapperboard Section 7, Final Warning, The Danger Within. Let's flip the lens. What if the person we've been warned about, the one consumed by their shadow, isn't out there? What if it's us? That question hits hard for a reason. Because no matter how many red flags you've spotted in others, the most dangerous shadow is always your own. It's not the enemy you fear, it's the enemy you deny. Carl Jung wasn't obsessed with evil in the world. He was obsessed with unconsciousness, especially the kind that hides in people who think they're above all that. Here's the chilling truth: we are all capable of becoming what we fear, if we refuse to acknowledge our potential for darkness. Every human has anger, jealousy, resentment, pettiness, ego, pride. That's not failure, that's the price of being alive. But when we say, "That's not me," we don't rise above it. We lose control of it. Denial doesn't delete. It disguises. And disguised darkness is the most dangerous kind. So, how do you know if you're merging with your own shadow? Let me give you 5 subtle warning signs. You believe you're always the reasonable one. If everyone else seems too emotional or overreacting, but you're always calm, detached, and right, that's not confidence. That's a blind spot. You over-identify with being the good person. If your self-image depends on being kind, generous, selfless, and you can't handle criticism without collapsing or attacking, your shadow is likely running the show behind the scenes. You feel contempt instead of curiosity. If someone disagrees with you and you feel disgust instead of wanting to understand, your shadow is defending its illusion of superiority. You justify behavior in yourself that you condemn in others. That's called projection. And it's the shadow's favorite trick. You blame patterns in your life on everyone else. If you're the common denominator in every chaotic relationship, it's time to stop pointing and start reflecting. Let's throw in a pattern interrupt. If 3 of your exes were toxic, there's a good chance your picker's broken, or your shadow's choosing for you. But don't panic. This isn't about shame. This is about power. Jung believed the shadow, when integrated, becomes a source of immense strength. Because when you own your darkness, no one can weaponize it against you. When you stop hiding from your flaws, they stop controlling your life. The question isn't, do I have a shadow? The question is, am I brave enough to look at it? Here's how to begin that process. Start with radical self-honesty. Ask yourself the questions no one else can answer for you. Where am I still pretending? What part of me am I afraid to reveal? When I'm triggered, what's really going on beneath the surface? Then, practice self-compassion without self-delusion. You're allowed to be a work in progress. But growth only happens when you call yourself out with love, not shame, not denial, and definitely not pride. Finally, surround yourself with people who reflect your truth, not your performance. People who don't just tell you what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. Not to tear you down, but to keep you grounded. Jung believed the only way to avoid being possessed by the shadow is to become conscious of it, own it, and integrate it. Not to fix it. Not to destroy it. But to understand that you are not just your light, you are also your darkness. And the goal isn't perfection. It's wholeness. Let me leave you with one final line from Jung. I'd rather be whole than good. Because when you become whole, you become real. And real people may not be perfect, but they're powerful. They see clearly. They live freely. And they stop spreading their unconscious pain to others. In the final section, we'll tie it all together, with one last reminder of why this insight matters more now than ever. And we'll show you where to go next, to keep your inner world strong, and your outer life aligned. The most dangerous sign in a person according to Carl Jung. You've just taken a journey through one of the deepest, and darkest, aspects of the human psyche. We've uncovered the true nature of the shadow, the subtle signs of possession, the emotional wreckage it leaves behind, and the uncomfortable truth that the real danger doesn't always wear a villain's face. Sometimes, it wears yours. But here's the good news. If you've made it this far, you're already ahead of most people. Because awareness is the first step to freedom. When you know the signs, you stop absorbing other people's chaos. When you know your shadow, you stop passing it on. This isn't about living in fear. It's about living in truth. And truth, even when it hurts, always leads to power. So stay awake. Stay honest. And most importantly, stay humble. Because the moment you think you've figured it all out, is exactly when the shadow slips back in. Fire! If this video opened your eyes, the next one will blow your mind. Click the link on screen now to watch The Power of Compounding, where you'll discover how time, not talent, creates unstoppable momentum in your life. Brain, subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs to see the unseen.